Hi, my name is Whitney Freeman, and I am lecturing on the article The Age of Twitter, Donald J. Trump and the Politics of Debasement by Brian Ott. His article focuses on social media, mainly Twitter, and how it has changed the public discourse into simple, impetuous, and frequently belittling and dehumanizing behavior. Ott uses Donald Trump as a primary example in his argument because the concepts of how Twitter are used are illustrated in Trump's use of the social media platform. Ott begins his article by explaining the logic and key features of Twitter. Ott argues that Twitter trains us to devalue others and thereby cultivating mean and malicious discourse. Ott defines key features of his argument using Twitter as the basis. Twitter demands simplicity. Because of the character count limits, it limits the depth of thought. Ott states that the growth of social media has ushered in the distracted mind. When reading these tweets, we're limited in our capacity to discuss and subsequently think about issues and events in more complex ways. His second feature is that Twitter promotes impulsivity. Tweeting requires little forethought, recollection, or consideration of consequences, so we usually see emotionally charged messages. Twitter, thirdly, fosters incivility for two reasons. It's informal and it depersonalizes interactions, so people don't consider how their interactions will affect others. Ott then moves on to explain the research of the dark triad and Twitter usage. He says that personality traits of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy are positively related to heavy Twitter usage. He further goes on to explain that heavy Twitter users rarely have something significant to say. Rather, they are motivated by self-interest, self-promotion, and a desperate need for attention, and they tend to post more emotionally charged tweets. Also, heavy Twitter users favor negativity and aggressiveness, which is key to popularity on Twitter. Basically, this breeds dark, degrading, and dehumanizing discourse. Ott states it breeds Donald Trump. Ott goes into backing up his claims by assessing Donald Trump through the lens of these key features of heavy Twitter users. First, he fits the key feature of simplistic messages with the Flesch-Kincaid grade level test by rating Trump's public discourse at a 3rd to 4th grade reading level. Ott studied Donald Trump's Twitter feed from October 2015 through May 2016 for this article and saw that his lexicon is very simple, with words like good, bad, and sad sometimes all in the same tweet. Trump's Twitter feed fits the key feature of impulsivity because his tweets favor the momentary over the considered. Americans see this almost daily now that he is in the White House because the White House is constantly having to explain or backpedal what he has been quoted on putting out there on Twitter. The next key feature is of Trump's Twitter feed that fits incivility. Trump uses dark and violent language that's prone to insults. He frequently uses exclamation marks in all capital letters, which is a stylistic practice that reinforces negative sentiment and heightens the emotional impact. For example, in May 2016, Donald Trump tweeted, "Why doesn't the failing at New York Times write the real story on the Clintons and women? The media is totally dishonest," end quote. These tweets heighten the emotional impact and are reflected in his followers, which scholars refer to as an emotional contagion. Ott further explains that these tweets from Trump spread sexism, racism, homophobia, and xenophobia like a social cancer. And his feed appeals and endorses white supremacists. Ott argues that Trump's tweets teach us to see others as less than human, and they inspire hatred and violence. Ott concludes his article with a post-election postscript. He criticized that the age of Twitter has allowed the rise of Donald Trump. However, it is not just the Republican establishment's reinforcement of Trump's ideals that led to his rise, but it's also the problem is twofold. There is an uncritical acceptance of social media platforms like Twitter as principal sources of news and information concerning public affairs, and the mainstream news media treatment of Twitter itself as news. An example of this is the mainstream news media coverage of Donald Trump's Twitter feed as news. This encourages the public to see social media as a reliable source of news and devalues the mainstream news media. Ott reminds us that people's opinions on Twitter are opinions and not news. Ott backs this claim from the Pew Research Center that found 62% of American adults get their news on social media. This is quite alarming because of the way that news is spread on social media is often misleading, and it's targeted to users' political preferences. The truth of the matter is that these articles, what is in these articles, aren't all that important usually, but it's how they are liked and shared and monetized that is scary. Ott describes consequences of the age of Twitter. Twitter and its underlying logic will continue to supplant television and its underlying logic as the dominant thoughts of the moment. We will also continue to see a growing rise of divisive and incendiary public discourse. We will see the collapse of thoughtful, reasoned, respectful discourse that isn't limited to just Twitter usage, but other social media platforms. And we'll see more dangerous demagogues rise to prominence. Donald Trump's election, according to Ott, marks the beginning, not the end, of the age of Twitter. There is a bit of a critique, I guess, to this article, is that it is reminding us to look at the way that social media is used with the news media, not personal usage. So we see Ott criticizing Twitter and other social media platforms negatively over their positive usage. I know that there are lots of positive ways that social media is used, but when it comes to mainstream news media coverage, that's where Ott focuses his article. Thank you for listening.